there was one global issue, and that issue is that in the 20 years that Prometheus has been making television, assets were segregated. There was no efficient way to identify particular assets across the board in terms of the different projects. And those assets fall into two categories. One is going to be material that Prometheus shoots, so material that we own. The second part is material that is owned by somebody else or we've acquired through third parties.
So in your ingest workflow, let's take that, because it's a really cool story for your field masters. So first off, let's just take something like Oak, which is super complex. Shooting in Canada and then post in LA, and the turnaround's quick. Just walk me through really quickly that sort of high level for everybody, because you laid it out earlier.
We were presented with some challenges with Oak Island, and that's where it's a produced television show. We're shooting what really happens. We don't tell the guys what to do, we don't tell them how to do it, and we don't tell them where to do it. So we have cameras everywhere shooting everything that they're doing.
Yeah, so there's 27 cameras?
It's hard to really identify because there's so many specialty cameras, but I can tell you this. The way that we label our cameras is based on letters in the alphabet. We have some cameras that are labeled MM, NN, QQ, because they're duplicated, right? So it's over 27 cameras. But in terms of what's rolling at a particular time on any particular scene, it could be up to 12 cameras on a scene, but there could be 3 scenes rolling at one time.
It's 2 terabytes of media a day, but it's like the equivalent of like 12 hours a day across maybe average 20 or more cameras.
This season we average 2 terabytes a day. The challenge was, in a tight turnaround of a television production show, how do we get that amount of material? I mean, if you take 2 gigabyte file and you put it on your computer and you copy it to a USB drive on your that's plugged directly into your computer, it's going to take a couple minutes, and it's infuriating. I have to figure out how to get that material from an island in Nova Scotia into my building and into edit, prepped, digitized, and into edit in a reasonable amount of time. And the way that we accomplish that is through a series of different projects. We have a drive out in the island that everything is put on. It uses storage DNA sync to sync it over to our Scale Logic in our office. From the Scale Logic, it's picked up by CatDV. In CatDV, it's logged, digitized, organized, and then we have an API that connects it directly into Content Agent. Content Agent picks it up. It picks up the metadata that was put in CatDV, and it automatically ingests it straight onto my Avid Nexus.
Yeah, it's making Avid media. So that was the big shift for me, and this was the first time we had done this as a project together too as well. We had this Content Agent plugin, but I remember Zeke coming to us and then you guys going like, yeah, we want to automate Avid ingest with Content Agent. And at the time, Content Agent could do that part, but you couldn't get the metadata in.
Yeah, so, I mean, the key for this all to make sense is that you're entering the metadata once. Exactly. If you enter it in one place and you have to copy and paste it in another, it's too segregated. And
you guys are now, and this is also something really different about your scale, understand you guys are now sort of a media hub for your operation. You have multiple shows going in multiple locations post-wise. So then at that point, the offline media is also then syncing out of your building, right? In some cases.
We expand and shrink with the projects that come in the house.
Show to show.
But we work in a way in which there needs to be a huge level of flexibility with the media. So I've approached it in a way where Prometheus, our main office, is really a hub. And from that hub, we dish media out to satellite companies. We're
a couple hundred hours a day of footage coming in, right? Roughly, give or take.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, you figure. So a couple hundred hours a day come in. You were just saying that comes into the building from Nova Scotia. It gets processed and digitized in 3 hours?
I would estimate, with the setup we have now with CatDV, if I do... if there's roughly 2 terabytes of media coming in from Oak Island, it might take them a couple hours to log, but the second they hit send, which is one button, select all the files, digitize. It goes into the Avid, and that process takes about 3 hours.
So that process is replacing what would normally be about 12 media composers.
Well, what would normally be 12 media composers in our setup.
Working all day.
Working an entire night shift. because they can now tie into the same system as the Avid. So I can create metadata in one system and share it with the other system. And that is invaluable to me. That with over 150 people working on the media, they can log into what is essentially a local website, type in metadata, and then someone can hit digitize and it goes into my Avid. That workflow has dramatically changed the way we approach getting stuff into the system.
Is that in the old days, if you were going to be twice as fast, you added twice the edit bays and twice the people. The AEs, I always joke that, in LA runs on AEs, like television runs on assistant editors. And so for you, what was great is that immediately, just a cultural shift that happened, I could see in your thinking. Once you knew this thing worked and this ingest worked, you immediately went out and upgraded your content agent and were able all of a sudden to vastly increase the speed, of what your ingest was. That's an interesting thing. Before that, before you had the sort of the glue of CatDV over the top of things, you can't really, like I said, you can't scale in automation. Now that you have automation, there's no telling what we're going to be, 2 years from now, what we're going to be talking about. This is going to be hilarious to us because the rig is going to be outrageous. And if you look at my old video from 2010, when I'm talking about CatDV and I was working in Reality and applying CatDV to it, I said, in this workflow, you can't adjust the producers. You must work to match the existing workflows. You have to fit into the human process that's happening. And so what's really nice is that you've been able to make this sort of gentle. My thing that I was saying is you can't really control what's coming in and you can't really control what's going out. Those things have to be the same. But in the middle, we were so much stuff we were able to clean up and make more efficient. I don't think another dam could have done that because we were able to react in real time to your ideas.
And over the course of 5 years of talking to every other asset management company, I realized that I couldn't squeeze myself into someone's product. I needed a product that adjusted to my needs.
Yeah.
I couldn't sit down with just an Avid editor and manage the amount of assets that we have. It's something interesting that we haven't really talked about, but which is very deliberately different than how we used to do things when it comes to the third-party materials.
Yeah.
So the third-party materials would be stills, quick times from sources or vendors that we, like clip show type stuff, or features that we're licensing or licensed material.
I want to stop you and tell for like the video purposes. This workflow is one of the most complex things I've ever experienced, I've ever run into in my career.
Not only the rights and clearance part, not the workflow, but there was a part of the workflow that we incorporate now that was never available. And that's, even though we made proxy files of the field footage that a producer could go onto a server and look at their proxy and see their field footage, nobody had access to the third-party material.
That's right.
Nobody saw the stills that were being pulled. Nobody saw the vendor footage. Yeah. And no producer had a way to search for it except for an editor in an Avid bay where it had been ingested.
That's right. It was it was like researcher to edit bay, right. But there was no middle ground. Right. It had to go there to be viewed.
Now a producer can literally sit down and type in gold bar, and they're going to find every gold bar that we've ever put into the system, and they're going to find it in a matter of seconds.
You have an ID for this media coming in that is unique to Prometheus. So you have a Prometheus ID that comes in and gets applied to everything you buy, let's say you acquire. People would get the same thing. They would go to Getty or whoever, and they would go to the source and get the same asset over and over and over and bring it into the system and not realize that you had it 5 times. It's particularly because you maybe get the low res and then you'd have to go get the high res, which is an additional effort once it's approved. So one of the things we put in is this dupe checker workflow where now if somebody types an ID, it immediately pops up and says, oh yeah, we have this, and it shows all the shows it was associated with and when it came in.
The dupe checker is a 2-part solution. So it looks for the original ID from the vendor, right?
The vendor, yeah.
So if you're using a traditional vendor and they have a number that's 1234, it's going to look and say, hey, 1234 has already been put in your system. What do you want to do? And then it's also going to look at the ID that we create, and it's going to say, hey, you've already used that number.
Yeah.
You cannot associate another piece of media with that number, and it prevents an issue like if we have something that's called AA1202, and you have 2 files named AA1202 and it's not unique, you go to an online and you inevitably license and digitize the wrong asset because you have two of the same thing. This eliminates the confusion. It eliminates the input of the same source twice, and it eliminates the need for a clearance department or business affairs or legal to go through and re-clear that element. Like we started Ancient Aliens 12 years ago. And Ancient Aliens deals heavily in third-party materials. And a good part of those third-party materials are space and shots of Earth and shots of planets. Yeah. I know in the system there's one shot of a planet that's in 44 times. Every time a new person starts at our company, they go to the traditional vendors and they download this beautiful HD shot of an Earth. And they send it over, they give it another name, and they put it in the system, and it's 44 times, and that clip gets cut into a show, which now has to go to clearance, which now has to get cleared again, and now has to get ordered and paid for again. So by doing this one little process at the top of the ingest, we're gonna eliminate all those inefficiencies with the material.
So if you could just talk a little bit about sort of the media and metadata transactions that happen for something coming in and then getting cleared and going to post.
We refer to it a lot as the rights and clearance workflow, but it's really the third-party workflow. It's anything that comes into the system that we don't specifically own. Now, a big part of material that comes into the system that we don't own is making sure we have the rights to use it. By choosing CatDV, choosing a central depository like ScaleLogic, we've been able to company-wide build efficiencies into that. In the simplistic terms, we have somebody that gets the file, they input it into the system, it goes to the Rights and Clearance Department, the Rights and Clearance Department clears it, sends it off to post. And nobody ever has to touch the file. Within the third-party workflow, we have materials that get labeled temp and materials that get labeled masters. The system itself is doing that for us. So within CatDV, if a researcher or an AP puts something in the system and they label it temp, it literally picks it up and it labels the file temp.
So the interesting thing in that workflow for me is the fact that, like you said, humans never touch it.
At the core of the workflow, as we're bringing in third-party material, we want to be able to say that third-party material is approved. We don't always necessarily get the option to wait for that approval to get it into edit. So we've built in if-then type options within our worker that say, if we need to make it go real fast, we're going to label it this, and it's going to pick that file up automatically, and it's going to move it to a server where an AE can grab it. And at the end, when we're done doing what we're doing, not only is it going to move it to a server that AE can grab it, but the AE should be able to hit a button in CatDV that says digitize this into Avid, and it's going to pick up that file, and it's going to digitize it right onto the Nexus, and it's going to include the metadata that was input by a researcher in a different building.
So I love the fact that anyone can look in and see, oh, these are temps that are not cleared. So your rights and clearances team can immediately look and see what's in that show that they've got to work on. Mm-hmm. The fact that you use your DAM as almost like a project management tool in certain areas, I think that's an interesting point to make.
When we get into the third-party materials and you're talking about legal and rights and clearances, there are assets associated with assets that you want to be able to track too, right? So a lot of times we'll shoot a field tape, we'll license a clip, and there'll be a document or some sort of sub-asset that you want to be able to associate. And right now there's not a really clear defined way, but I see a path in which we're going to get there. We're going to be able to do a live link on a CatDV asset that says, here's the contract. Here's the signed release for the person that's in this shot, and you're going to get to it by clicking a button. You're not going to have to do a search. You're not going to have to go through 10,000 files. You're not going to have to pick up a binder of where it's printed out. And you're going to get to the point where those things are so associated with each other that when I take that AAF that I pull out of my Avid, or I open that bin inside CatDV, you're going to be able to print a report, and that report is going to be able to have that associated file, that subset of files, be attached to it. And it's something that's usually takes a week. It's going to take the matter of time of importing a file, an AAF file.
Well, from our part of it, from NorthSource part of it, this is one of the cases where working in different verticals helps, all verticals. We're doing tons of integrations right now with Squarebox, where we're working with outside project management systems. We have a publisher that we connect out and get all the book data that you see on Amazon automatically comes into CatDV. It's the same thing. That's one of the great overlaps, is that if we work for these other businesses, post-production, another challenge that we've all faced in production and post-production is there was no central repository for data. So while the rest of the world was getting all these cloud systems and everything was going digital, there was still this gulf between that world and like editorial. And CatDV, in my opinion now, with its openness, allows us to connect to these outside things. So as your clearance department moves into a digital contract management system, you now have a digital asset management system that can relate assets and contracts. Those sorts of links, when I started in this business, that was my dream. But it wasn't real. Now we are connecting to Google. Now we are connecting to project management. So it's really neat how you drove our technology forward. You drove our processes forward. You challenged us to do new things. At the same time, we have these other people that are doing the same, and that comes back to you now.
When we got into the world of digital assets, everything started living on a drive. And the way, Avid being our primary tool, the way that workflow works, you can only digitize from one place on one system in one room, and when you have the amount of material we have, the bottleneck there is enormous, right? Yeah. So based on that, the workflow that we do could take 12 days just for one day of shooting, just to get it all ingested into the system, right? Because you're bottlenecked to one system on one drive. What ScaleLogic offered us was a network attached storage system that is attached to all the drives, a nearline storage that isn't necessarily our Nexus storage that we edit from, even though you can edit from it, because I do use Content Agent and I do use CatDV. It gives me a throughput that I wouldn't have, or I wouldn't have access to if I had one drive sitting on the side. And I now have access all over my building and remotely, just based on that.
From our side of it, from an automation standpoint, we live or die by the storage. We don't think about the storage till it doesn't work. Right. And so, ironically, I don't think a lot of customers think about this. Your speed in 2019 is not so much CPU limited anymore. It's really storage limited. These workflows, these boxes we have way too much CPU power for what we're doing in a lot of cases, especially for like moving things around. We're doing a ton of file moves and stuff. So for North Shore's take, the storage needs to just be reliable, do not present a problem to us, whether it's permissions or anything, and it needs to be fast enough so that we're not stuck with a bottleneck, because you're exactly right. Everyone always likes to talk in editorial about how many streams does it play. Well, that's all well and good, but at Prometheus, there are thousands of transactions per minute in some cases happening. In an hour, there could be 10,000, 100,000 transactions happening. So imagine if you had just a giant team of people. We're duplicating that because now we're putting these robots in place that are doing this stuff. So that's another thing for us, is that sure, you could go out and get a really inexpensive NAS box, but the truth is that that's not going to hold up if you're really doing work. For us, the thing is that you can do that. But for us, the idea is that we know that if we need to move giant amounts of data, we're like, you're talking about that jump drive. We're not going to sit there for 20 minutes waiting on those files to move. Those files are moving fast.
And it's attached to two different networks. So it's attached to our local network. So, say I have raw footage and a producer wants to look at the raw footage, they can have access to it if they need to. But it's also attached to our Nexus network, and that's a 10 gig network, and things move. When I'm sending stuff through the 10 gig network from CatDV to Content Agent to ScaleLogic, they move, and they move at a pace that we're just not used to. Here's a unique problem that ScaleLogic solved for us. We shoot so much material at such a pace, we're storing them on massive individual drives, right? So in the office, I have 100 70 terabyte drives, 80 terabyte drives, now 100 terabyte drives that I'm putting footage on. And it creates a real inefficiency when I have to access all those drives concurrently. There are times, Oak Island might have 250 terabytes per season, 500 terabytes in archive that I need to access instantly. And when I have to plug and unplug and replug and move, 25, 30 pound portable drives that are just littered all over the room, it's very difficult to manage that way. ScaleLogic very specifically puts it all in one place. It gives me the read-write times that I need, and I have instant access to anything that's active. From there, I LTO and archive it, and I bring it to and from the exact same location that it always existed before. But when I need it, when it's active and it's sitting on this large parking lot, I can get it instantly, which is very important to me. ScaleLogic is the glue that ties the other elements together. With that server, I'm able to communicate to multiple different systems, multiple different processes in multiple different locations, and it works. And it's something that once I turn it on, I don't have to worry about it. The best things about ScaleLogic is that because it's a network attached server, and it's attached to my high-speed routers and switches and network, it becomes a very useful central repository for not just my media, but for all my other processes to access one point and do their job and do it fast and efficiently. And it's one of those beautiful products where it does what it's supposed to do, and you set it and forget it. I don't really have to spend a lot of time worrying if it's going to turn on at the beginning of the day. It just works. When I started doing this 20 years ago, I had an Avid Meridian that had two striped bays, or had an Avid Meridian that had two striped drives, and each one of those drives was a gig each. And the ability to work with 2 gigs of material was mind-blowing. Now I shoot 2 gigs a minute and hundreds and thousands of minutes on a daily basis. So we're literally on a show like Oak Island, where per season we're shooting 250 terabytes. I mean, there has to be a place to put that active media. You can always LTO it, you can always archive it, you can always deep store in Glacier or Amazon somewhere, but there has to be a place where when I need it right now, I can put it somewhere. And having it on 500,000 different drives scattered around my facility is not an efficient way to deal with it. With ScaleLogic, I get a massive petabyte server where I can take all my active media, put it in one place, and have a central repository where whoever needs it can get to it, and they can get to it quickly and efficiently. But my entire company works on CatDV. So how did they do that? They do that through the web interface. And with North Shore and CatDV and the customization, I now have a bunch of floating licenses that the 200 people that work in my office can at any time log into CatDV, search and find something. You have your high client, which has a very specific need in post-production because it has advanced features. The average person in my company is using the web client, and the web client is slick, fast, and efficient, but it gives you advanced features also. And on the backside of that, everybody is using Akomi, and that just gives them access to all the material. In CatDV Web, I can do a lot of things. I can teach people to do a lot of things that are more complex. I call Akomi the Google of Prometheus, right? So if you're just looking for something hard and fast, you go to Akomi, you type in, Oak Island and the date, and you're going to pull up all the footage that was shot on Oak Island on that date. And it's just a really good, it's like a hammer to get you to what you need to find quickly.
So one of the things when people talk about automation, they always wonder, like, well, what do the people do now? In television production, there's never a lack of things to do. So I always laugh. People ask, well, did you lay people off? It's not that anyone got laid off. It's not that they're not hired. They're just doing the stuff that wasn't happening before. There's so many creative decisions to be made and creative processes that that time gets filled, and they're just not cutting and pasting or duplicating work anymore.
It's interesting because the question that I get a lot, and it's difficult to answer because when you talk about things like AI, when you talk about things with automation, the world, there's a whole subset of people that just will not go to that line in the grocery store where there's not somebody servicing your needs, right? what I find is that that these tools are adding to the efficiency. Like, I don't need to replace people, but I'm able to put people back in the position that they're intended to do. An assistant editor is meant to assist the editor. They're not meant to spend all day digitizing an element, right? So when I take that out of their hand, I can now put them more directly involved in the process. They can go back to assisting the editor, they can go back to assisting the producers, and they can go back to the important parts of the process. What we're doing with the automation is important, but it doesn't have to be handheld.
So Greg, talk to me for a second. We've talked a lot about technology on and off. Talk to me a little bit about the human side of it. Like, who were sort of the winners? Who really dug what you've done, and what's been the effect on your users as far as implementing this technology?
Since the beginning, we've been talking about there's a bifurcation of the processes. One is the field tapes, one is the third party. When you get into the field tape part, it used to be teams of assistant editors digitizing and logging all night. Now I have one guy that digitizes and logs, and I hit a button, I send it into the system. So now an assistant editor can spend more time and put more detail into that grouping. And the logging that the other guy does, that comes straight from the camera reports to the DNC reports, into CatDV, into the Avid. They don't have to do it anymore. So they're ecstatic that they don't have. They're ecstatic that they don't have to go to a document and copy and paste line by line from one document into the system. It just goes in. I know from a practical standpoint, the rights and clearance department are finding huge efficiencies in the ability to grab 10,000 items from one specific vendor, sort it, filter it by researcher, date, content, and approve and unmask and say, hey, all this stuff from this person on this day is good. Approved, moved it on. What I have found, knock on wood, is since the day we turned it on, I haven't had a single issue with Scale Logic. And that is a great value to me.
Yeah, for us, it was so fun. It was such a challenge. It took us a minute to shift gears because I always tell people, we had worked a lot in the corporate space. We'd learned a lot in the institutional work, and television has a pace and has demands that just don't exist in other industries in media. So it was super fun for us because once we adjusted into it and we're like, okay, this is going to be fun, and we saw it as challenges. Prometheus, the challenges that Prometheus brought us in bringing television production and automating television production. One of the biggest jokes I make about North Shore Automation is that we named ourselves North Shore Automation 6 years before anyone wanted to automate anything. So for us, we love when people are like, okay, we've got a process, but we want to take it here. We want this process to get better. And that's something that we saw in this project, absolutely. And everybody stepped up. Like you said, we had Scale Logic provide the base. We had, Squarebox really made CatDV, and we were requesting features, we were requesting all kinds of things from them, and I really feel like the teams really made each other raise the bar. But the fact that this is sort of a living, breathing production that a dam is interacting in the middle of, I've never seen anything like it in my career.
Yeah, it's great because an asset doesn't just exist in its own world. An asset has life cycles. And where I might use this asset on a project today, within that life cycle, it's put into the system, it's waiting for something to happen to it, it gets sent on to be in clearance, and it gets approved. And that life cycle changes for the asset when it's outside of the project. So there's a point at which it gets re-cleared for a new process, a new project, a new part of the workflow. And the complexity of what we've done is we've allowed that to happen very easily. In a lot of cases, we've allowed that to happen without ever having to touch the asset again. We're managing it within a database system. We're managing the status, we're managing the catalog, we're managing that all within one central location. And the asset just stays where it is.